Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the new Canadian horror film Undertone, which is directed by Ian Tuason in his feature film directorial debut. Now, on his Letterboxd page, there's a little biography that kind of describes him. He's a director I really had no knowledge of going into this movie, but supposedly he is known for his live-action virtual reality and POV horror shorts, including Sit Back, Uncanny Valley, and Experience Colorblind, which collectively amassed millions of views online. So that's interesting that he sort of was experimenting within the field of horror, because Undertone really is sort of an experimental horror film in the vein of Paranormal Activity, which is something I noted in my Letterboxd review after I watched the movie last night in the theaters. And so it's kind of funny, I had no idea writing that review or going into this movie that he had already been tapped to direct Paranormal Activity 8 in 2027. That's going to be a film that he's working with Blumhouse Pictures on, and it's going to be kind of interesting to see what he does there with it. But Undertone is a film that I'm really excited to get into my thoughts on, so without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's review Undertone. So as I said, the film was directed by Ian Tuason, who also wrote the film's screenplay. It was produced by Dan Slater and Cody Callahan, and it stars Nina Curie and Adam DeMarco. Now, Nina Curie is basically the lone person that really carries the movie. It's really a one-location type of movie, featuring the one character going through this sort of supernatural experience. Now, Adam DeMarco is there. He's a voice on the other side of the phone call that we have in the movie as they're trying to create this podcast. It's two friends, a man and a woman, who host a paranormal podcast, Evie and Justin. So Evie is the woman and she is the skeptic. Justin is the one that's more of the believer. And they are sort of doing this weekly paranormal podcast. And Evie is living right now with her mother. She's the caregiver to her dying mother, who seems to have some sort of neurodegenerative disease. And they get this really kind of creepy email, this sort of anonymous email with 10 recordings, and the whole idea is if you get all the way through to the 10th one, something really bad is going to happen. The idea is that it's kind of like a haunted sort of chainmail type of thing, sort of harkening back to the old school sort of horror of things like The Ring or other things like that, sort of like urban legend style horror films, and kind of tying into like early internet, but also now it's the modern day internet with something like a podcast being used as sort of a modern medium through which to tell the story. And I think it's a really clever sort of hook for the movie. It kind of is a bit of a silly concept if you really think about it, but so is something like The Ring, this idea of like a haunted videotape and then there's a phone call. It's sort of, you have to take it very seriously if you really want your audience to be affected by the scares in the movie. And this is a movie that doesn't really have too many scares. Instead, it really relies on its sound design to immerse you in the film and to slowly build up the tension with some really unsettling audio in the movie. It's really just layers and layers of unsettling audio that could slowly kind of really dig under your skin. And there is some scares here and there, but the film really doesn't go for jump scares. This isn't a jump scare heavy movie. It's more of that A24 style, slow burn, like horror movie type of paranormal, supernatural sort of thing, which is, this is a movie that was released by A24 in the United States, so that makes sense that it would be within that kind of vein. And I think Undertone is a movie that does feel very experimental, like I was saying earlier. It reminds me a lot of Paranormal Activity in the way that it rewires your brain when you're viewing it. This is not the standard way of doing a horror movie, but instead it brings you into its sort of weird way of presenting the information and really tries to get under your skin with the sort of novelty of it. So something like Undertone, this is really, the sound design is really the strength of the movie. It's the core of the movie. It's what needs to be effectively executed in order for this movie to land. And I think it does a very good job. I think there was a lot of moments when I was very unsettled. I think throughout the runtime, it was getting under my skin, and I'm a very sort of desensitized person when it comes to horror movies. So if you're getting under my skin, I think that's sort of an effective statement about your movie. And yeah, not a lot happens, but we do really care about Evie as a character, and we're really drawn into this story with her mother, and then also these creepy sort of recordings from this email. So her and her mother, they're the only characters that are actually shown on screen in the movie. Everyone else is just an off-screen voice. And so you really get this strong feeling of isolation, and then you are draped in this Catholic imagery that really overwhelms the whole set of the movie. It really does feel like sort of that kind of like Catholic grandma meme, but it's a mother that is dying and we're in her house, and a lot of the aesthetic choices, a lot of the visual choices that are being done by Tuason are to really make that room of the dying mother feel like it's The Exorcist, right? The shots are very similar to The Exorcist. The lighting, everything about the room, and just the way everything is done, it really is trying to hammer in that point, that reference point. And I think the usage of that visual language really helps to set up the uncanny feeling you get around this house. And also, I would say that in general, the movie uses things like faith, uses the theme of neurodegenerative diseases and dying parents to make this clearly something that's deeply personal to Tuason. And you can really tell that this is something that it's almost like it's been gnawing at him and wanting to come out, which is what the best art really is. It's something that is deeply personal that needs to be told. He's trying to find a way to most effectively tell something that's so deeply personal to him. You really get this sort of suffocating isolation. You really get into the mindset of Evie, and you get her unraveling it. You really kind of are mirroring her unraveling, and I am skeptical as well about the emails, but then slowly and surely they kind of like dig of like a brainworm in your mind. You're like, oh my god, they might be real, and it's really starting to build up, and each one is getting scarier and scarier. And I just think that that is like the most effective sort of like childlike dream horror logic. And it really works, and it's really effective, and it digs under your skin. And I think that that's a really clever way of doing horror on a budget, because you can really tell this is a lower budget experimental type of horror movie, which is really a fun thing to watch, is when this is really done well, because there's so many avenues you can take horror, and really leaning on the sound design in the way that Undertone does is such an effective way, I think, to modernize the horror film. And it does, like I said, it brings hope for him when he does Paranormal Activity 8, because I think that that franchise is one that was always very experimental and always trying to push the boundaries of what is sort of our wiring when it comes to horror movies. We have a certain expectation, but this is kind of rewiring our brains. So Undertone, it's using the visual language of things like The Exorcist. It's doing all these things that maybe we've seen in other modern horror movies that we've seen from companies like A24, but then it's completely rewiring our brain, and it's sort of short-circuiting it by really leaning on the sound design. We get so many times where it cuts to black and we just get the unsettling sort of audio that's just overlaying everything, and just it really does dig under your skin, and it's unsettling. And while nothing really happens, that's maybe a complaint I'm sure people are going to throw at the movie. To me, there is a lot going on. There's a lot of personal stuff going on. There's a lot of issues of faith and about family and about dying mothers and about sort of anxiety around becoming a parent, and all that sort of stuff is just really in there. And so it makes it a really thematically deep movie. There's a lot of rich subtext right underneath the layer of really disturbing audio. And really, it is disturbing audio. There really is, I mean, the creepy sort of kids' music and the hidden meanings and the
more that you listen, I like it here in the dark.
going in reverse, and the way that they do it with the podcast, I think, is very effective. Now, my critiques with the movie kind of tie in with some of the strengths. So this is an independent sort of experimental horror movie. It's the type of horror movie that really is able to push the boundaries because you're not on a huge budget, and you don't have to deliver certain things. You don't have to try and be like a populist film that's trying to appeal to as massive an audience as possible. But I think when you do have a lower budget, unfortunately, some of the negatives and drawbacks is you can't always land the ending with something that's sort of appropriately dramatic. And I think here the ending was a bit underwhelming after everything we had seen, and is one of the biggest weaknesses of the movie. And I think that that's really disappointing. I think when you're building up this movie with really great audio, and you're really building up to some really intense finale, you really gotta land it. But it felt like they kind of just ran out of time and money and just threw something together that would kind of end it in a vague enough way that you don't really know exactly what happened, but makes you trying to think about it and maybe come back and watch it again. And I just felt it was kind of like a cheap, hacky way of doing the ending, but it was understandable maybe with their lower budget, or maybe they just didn't know where to go with it. And endings are always so difficult with horror movies, but when you nail it, it really does elevate your movie even more. And if you struggle with it, it can kind of detract a little bit from the experience. Now, to me, it doesn't really detract too much. It doesn't take away too much from the overall experience, because it's such a fun experience in the theaters, because it really is unsettling you. But it does kind of leave you feeling a bit underwhelmed. And I also think another problem with the way the movie is handled is that there's just way too much time in between each podcasting session. It's like it felt like forever just to get through this podcast, and it would be like one or two audio tapes that are like 5 seconds long and like a quick reaction, and then it's like, oh, I'm just too tired to continue working. It's like, what? Just go, push forward. And I understand that she's, in an exhausting situation with the sort of caregiving that she's having to do for her dying mother, but it just felt really awkward and weird, and just it really kind of killed some of the suspense. I think they were great with the one sort of setting, the one limiting the characters, limiting the settings, limiting it all to basically this podcast and then this house with the dying mother. But then they should have, in my opinion, limited the time frame that this story took place. I think it just was way too long of not a movie, because I think the runtime was fine, but I think the time in world should have been shortened, and it should have been maybe 1 or 2 nights as opposed to sort of the way they did it. And I understand you don't want to do it all in one night, but maybe two at most, maybe a third night. But I felt like it kind of just, they tried to drag it along for longer than it should have, and you could have really leaned in maybe on more so a quicker sort of time frame for the narrative to be taking place, and it would have made things have a little bit more urgency and pop when they happen, as opposed to this really slow burn, which is effective, but I think it would have been more effective if it had been compressed just a little bit. But besides those few kind of complaints, I really did like this movie, and it was made on a very low budget, so I really respect the filmmakers here for being able to deliver such an interesting horror movie on such a low budget. And I do look forward to what Tuasan's able to do in the future with something like Paranormal Activity, which is a franchise that I'm always intrigued by. So Undertone is definitely one I would recommend to horror fans, especially if you like the sort of A24 style slow burn horror movies, and if you like weird experimental lower budget horror movies that try something different than what you're used to. Definitely would recommend you go and see Undertone in the theaters if that sounds up your alley. So yeah, definitely one that I really enjoyed. This was a really good horror movie. It definitely sort of lived up to the expectations I had going into it, which weren't really that high, but just the trailer alone seemed very creepy and unsettling, and this was a creepy and unsettling sort of movie, and one that I look forward to revisiting again and again. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you liked this video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I drop a new video. Again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.